1. When I was 17, I worked construction for a small company outside Kansas City. We did multiple jobs all over the city, from restaurants to stores. On this particular job, we got a contract to remodel a church. We went and gave bids, and everything went well, and we ended up securing the job. Below is day by day, the experience I went through and how ultimately we forfeited the contract. Day 1. This is the day we arrived, and nothing was out of the ordinary. It was a typical Monday, and we unloaded all the trucks and took measurements and just looked around, and really admired the beauty of the place. We took all measurements and got lists of materials needed and called it a day. Day 2. We showed up and waited for our materials to be delivered, and while we waited, we got to tearing down some of the old rotten wood and broken flooring. As we were 30 minutes to an hour into this, we heard walking in the back room. We thought it was a delivery guy coming in the back door, but nothing was there and the door was locked. We didn't think much and shrugged it off, and soon enough the materials arrived, and we started finishing up removal and called it a day. Day 3. We show up, and our supplies are absolutely in disarray. We call the owner and ask if anyone has been there, and he informs us that the church is closed for the week for the construction. This kind of freaks us out, but we just slap it all back together and go about work. The entire day, every time we make a noise or remove or add anything to the church, we hear a bang behind the pulpit. We investigated like 10 times, and never would it repeat or do anything unless we were actively working on the church. It starts to get dark, and we both leave. Did not enjoy that day. Day 4. I'm already not wanting to go, but of course we have to. We show up late, like 2 or 3 p.m., and start going about it, and sure as the rain, we begin it right back, and even louder. Bang, bang. I didn't even want to work anymore. We got so annoyed we physically moved the podium to the back of the church. The banging doesn't stop coming from the same place right under where it was. We just try to ignore and keep working. Again, I refuse to stay after dark, and we do what we can and leave. Last day. We show up, and first thing I clearly see is the podium is back where it started, and our supplies were messed up more than last time. I'm at this point completely over the whole job, and I clean up our supplies and tell my buddy, move the podium again and let's just finish. He moves it, and we start working. This time, though, absolutely no banging. Wonderful. This goes on for 30 minutes to an hour, and we hear loud running footsteps in the back again. We both go check. Yes, we were scared. And there is absolutely nothing. This happens 5 or 6 times in a few hours span. Finally, we both agree to just leave. We start packing our tools, and we hear a terrifying scream from a girl, and running in the back again very fast. We ran outside as fast as we could. We left the tools and had the owner leave them outside, and we picked them up. Never went in that place again, and something is horribly wrong with that church. Never got paid either. Don't care. 2. I have been asked over the past 6 years to retell this story over and over by other airmen, so I feel it's necessary to share with everyone. We were stationed at F.E. Warren, which is a nuclear weapon-oriented base to say the least. The weapons are always stored off in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but flat dirt roads and cornfields for as far as the eye can see. You could watch your dog run away for 2 days. Fast forward to my fire team talking up this haunted school less than a mile away down the road. I get amped up and persuade the FSC to let us go off-site to go to the school. He lets us go since he felt it was necessary to see this place. So we prepare the trip by ensuring all our NVGs, thermals, and our flashlights were highly operational because someone said ghost drain batteries. Up in the truck and make our way. The first thing we notice upon approaching this old decrepit school was that something from the deep dark was absolutely screeching at us. So loudly that it almost didn't seem real. Turns out it was an owl in a pipe that was projecting his screech. My fire team partner Salvador points out that owls are a bad omen in his religion. Crap. The only entrance point is the front door that's been busted wide open from all the storms. We enter into the main hallway, long, dark, dank, but definitely not alone. Immediately in front of us is the auditorium. Had a bloody owl shredded to bits in the direct center. The four of us were huddled together when my fire team leader Curtis sees something run out from the auditorium that we were standing in, and ran down the hallway. Like a shadow is what I remember him saying. We walk down to the end of that terrifying hallway and come to the entrance to the notorious basement. Walking through, I continually looked over my shoulder because something kept touching my neck softly. My spine is shivering cold, my entire body hot as fire. It made no sense at all. Blood is scribbled poorly on the walls, spelling the phrase "get out." Oh, okay then. I try to act like this isn't terrifying and tell the boys to head up. We get back up to the top, and lo and behold, there's a giant open maintenance shaft in the wall right at the entrance to the basement. That wasn't open. Walk back to the entry of the hallway and attempt to turn on the devices we had. NVGs were at low battery. What? This is where it gets weird. We're in a line formation, basically 4 dudes crapping their pants in a row, staring off into this dark, horrifying long hallway. We get thermals up, and basically we make out these 2 tiny glowing balls that are basically at the end of the hallway, just intertwining with one another. We pass the thermals back and forth, debating whether it's a spirit or dust picking up low light. And we conclude that it's not dust, as we could clearly see dust around these glowing walls. The glowing balls stop moving and stand still all of a sudden. Thermals die, NVGs die, and from the deepest part of the hallway a ceramic plate flies straight at us and shatters loudly at our feet. We panic, and in the confusion we separate. I bolt straight through what's left of the door, tearing it off the wall, and one of the other 2 guys, Salvador, went to the auditorium. Bad idea. He doesn't come out for a solid 2 minutes of terror. We all link up and absolutely sprint back to our driver, who was patiently waiting in the truck, and tell him to floor it. We're hyperventilating and can't process the feeling of terror we just encountered. Approach the gate to Golf 1, and the radio starts acting up, changing dial to a static station, and then cranking itself to the max. Now I feel that I am a calm person and a rational human being. But I falcon punched that radio so hard it broke. We get into the station and tell the FSC what went down. He notices that our gunner Salvador is acting weird and quiet. We calm down and try to settle for the rest of our long 14-hour shifts into the morning. After an hour, we all notice that Salvador's strangeness is now concerning. He was staring at a blank wall for more than an hour of muttering. We went up to the FSC desk and brought the concerns to him. I tell him that I'm not a religious man, but I think we desperately need to pray with him now, and that I think he is going to harm himself. Salvador is a great happy dude. We know it was the spirit. We walk out past 2 secure doors, 2 separate rooms, to see Salvador slowly turn his head from the blank wall, smile and say, "I don't want you to pray for me, and I'm not going to harm myself." I pooped my pants right there. This was not my friend, and it's not humanly possible to have heard our conversation. We get an alarm activation at one of our sites, always a rabbit or something, and I'm seriously worried. It's a long drive to the site, so I'm just drilling him with questions about what's going on, mostly met with hostility. While on site, I conduct the exterior walk around, and this is where Salvador, who's been watching us off-site at the Humvee with thermals, yells at me to stop walking. That's when he tells me that there was a red figure following over me. Just a heads up, thermals don't pick up anything other than black and white. Alarm gets cleared, and we head back. Salvador snaps back to his muttering again. This continues until I get uncomfortable that I pull the Humvee over and get out to talk. As soon as we get face to face and I put my hand on him, he has no recollection of any of the crazy shit he's been spewing off. Shakes it off for the rest of the night, and we press. Finish shift, rack out. Woken up to Salvador complaining about someone going in his room and trashing it, and then beating the crap out of his back. Sure enough, his room is trashed with 3 other mattresses all over and stuff just wrecked. Lift his shirt up, and yep, the guy's got some serious markings on his back. We were just nook cops, but we could tell that these were not self-inflicted. I told my flight chief the story that day, and told him that if he ever tried to set me up for a trip out at Gulf 1, that I would be going AWOL. By the way, Salvador is still a good dude and not possessed anymore. Guy had his grandma rub an egg on his body, and I'm pretty sure we're all good now. 3. Last night I experienced something very disturbing on Donner Pass in Truckee, California. The area is known for being haunted because it has a rich history of death and violence, i.e. the Donner Party, to name the biggest one. But being born and raised in Reno, I've been to Truckee hundreds of times, and have never experienced something quite this disturbing. My fiancé and I went to Northern California to visit his family for Christmas, and we didn't leave his family's house until about 6:30 p.m., and we had about a 5-hour drive ahead of us to get home. By the time we got close to Truckee, I had realized that I had made a mistake not taking a bathroom break at the last gas station we stopped at in Yuba City, because every gas station after that was closed for Christmas. By the time we hit Donner Pass around 10:30 to 11 p.m., I thought my bladder was going to explode in my body if we didn't stop, and I was expecting to have to wait until we got to the Arco at the bottom of the pass, but to my surprise there was a big rest stop at the top of the pass. I remind everyone that I have driven through this pass hundreds of times and never noticed this rest stop. As soon as we pulled up to this stop, I immediately feel uneasy. I felt a flight-or-fight instinct kick in that I have never felt at Truckee before, and I've gone to Truckee to investigate paranormal activity multiple times. But my need to use the restroom outweighed my uneasy feeling. In the parking lot was one car, a blue car. Could have been a Honda, but I honestly didn't look too closely because the man standing next to the car, although looking completely normal and harmless, made me feel like a rabbit in the face of a wolf. I couldn't figure out why I was so scared of this man and dismissed it on late-night paranoia and got out of the car. I had to pass this man to get to the building with the bathroom in it, but the closer I got to him, the more panic I felt, to the point where I stopped in my tracks and waited for my fiancé to walk in front of me. He stopped when I did, though, seemingly because he caught the same creepy vibe from the guy that I did. But then walked in front of me anyways. He's a real sweetheart, I'm so lucky. The entire walk from the car to the building, the man looked almost through my fiancé and at me, and had a really creepy smile on his face the entire time. And it made my fiancé so uncomfortable that he put his keys in between his knuckles in case he had to fight the guy. When we walked into the building, things got really weird. Really fast. As soon as we opened the doors, my vision became strange. I tried focusing my eyes on the signs in the building, but no matter how hard I tried, my eyes just kept unfocusing themselves. It freaked me out, but I dismissed it on the long, dark drive contrasting with the bright lights in the building and walked towards the women's restroom. The men's restroom was on the left and the women's on the right, and both had 2 sides to choose from. My fiancé needed to use the restroom himself, so I assumed we were going separate ways, and ran into the left side of the women's restroom. As soon as I turned the corner, I was immediately even more creeped out, because there was toilet paper all over the floor. It looked like 3 or 4 rolls had been unraveled all over the place, but again, dismissed it as tweakers doing weird shit at a rest stop, and took a deep breath and opened the first stall. Clogged and disgusting, so then I moved to the second stall, clogged and disgusting. Then I moved to the third stall. But as I reached for the door, I got a sinking feeling that someone was behind the door and backed up. I looked under the stall and saw a woman's feet. She was wearing black small-heeled shoes with weird-looking silver buckles on them, and under her feet was what looked like a puddle of water. It looked like the woman was soaking wet, dripping water all over the floor. It spooked me, so I turned around and went to the other side of the bathroom to try those stalls. When I got to the other side, as I was passing the mirrors, I glanced towards them and saw a woman following me in the reflection. She was about my height. I'm 5'2", maybe a little taller, black hair, and she was wearing a white turtleneck buttoned-up shirt and a black skirt that was long enough to reach below the mirrors. She was soaking wet, and she had makeup on that looked like it was painted on by someone else. But the creepiest feature I saw was her eyes. I'm not new to seeing the dead. The sensitivity runs in my family, but I have never seen a ghost that looked like this. Her eyes were grayed out the way a corpse's eyes do after a few hours of passing. I worked at a morgue a few years ago. That's the only reason I know what that looks like. Usually when I see ghosts, they have normal eyes, but hers were different. They were wrong. It scared me to death, and I ran into a stall and locked the door. I heard her footsteps come up to the stall, and I saw the shoes I saw in the other stall from under my own. When I cannot make this up, the woman started aggressively trying to open the stall. I was pulling back from inside, and she was pulling back from outside with the force of a living person, and then suddenly it stopped. I said out loud, "What the actual fuck?" and took a deep breath and sat down to finally just use the damn toilet. When I heard loud, fast footsteps come from outside of the bathroom, into the side I was on, and saw brown leather suede boots running into the bathroom and towards my stall. And at this point I've had it with the ghost crap, so I stood up, closed my eyes, and ran out of the bathroom. My fiancé was standing outside the bathroom, apparently waiting for me, because the guy outside creeped him out so bad he didn't feel like I was safe going into the bathroom. He told me he was standing there the entire time waiting for me, and I told him to get me the fuck out of that building and that I wanted to go home. He asked me what happened and who he heard in the bathroom with me, and I said, "What the actual fuck?" It dawned on me that this was not something that only I had experienced, but that he had also heard something. So I told him I think I saw a ghost, and that we need to just leave. When we walked out of the building, the same guy was standing by his car watching us. I looked down at his shoes, and he was wearing the same suede brown boots that I thought I'd seen in the bathroom. When we drove away, my fiancé said, "That guy gave me serial killer vibes. He was looking at you like he was hunting you, and it really freaked me out. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw that man again in the news." And when I told him about my experience in the bathroom, he felt that it was possible he had heard someone there before, and that she was trying to warn me. He also expressed that he had the same experience with the weird change in vision when we walked in. However, again, this could have just been the change from the dark to a bright room. I can't get her face out of my head, and I'm worried that if that guy did hurt her, it will hurt someone else. My fiancé is a Marine veteran, and he doesn't spook easily. And he's met a lot of violent murderers, so when he says he recognized him as someone that wanted to hurt me, I believed him wholeheartedly. Any thoughts? Has anyone experienced anything like this before? 4. My Mima was a nurse. She started in the Cadet Nurse Corps during World War II. After the war, she became an RN and spent the next 12 years working at her local hospital, mostly on the cardiac floor. But other parts, too, if they needed her. She loved her job, but something bad happened with one of the doctors she worked under, and she saw no choice but to move on to elsewhere. Her next job was at a long-term care facility, a nursing home, to the uninitiated, where she worked for a lot of years until her retirement. My pawpaw died before I was even thought of, so I never knew him outside of pictures and the stories my mama told me. Mima didn't say much about him, but she never minded Mama talking about him. A few years after he passed, Mima met a lady who waitressed at her favorite restaurant, Clovey. And Mima and Clovey lived together for the rest of Mima's life. Due to the times and it being the very Baptist South, everyone understood, but still they were roommates. They did very well, and kept the little farm my Meemaw and Papa had bought in the family. They were even able to hire farm hands so they could both focus mostly on their careers. Meemaw had a lot of stories about strange goings-on at the hospital and at the nursing home. Even some she mentioned existed, but said she'd never repeat. I'd like to share one now that touched my heart a bit, so if you're looking for something terrifying, this'll probably be boring for you. This one happened at the nursing home where she worked, and she was in her early 30s at the time. They had a resident, a man named Thomas. Thomas could talk, but usually didn't. He was a slow-moving man who liked to wheel himself around and be at least an hour early to any meal or activity. He couldn't dress himself or tell you if he needed to pee or not, and she would laugh and tell about how she'd have to change his pants at least once per shift, because she could never quite get his toileting schedule down, and he had what she called a 5-gallon drum for a bladder. Thomas had 2 bird feeders his kids had put outside his window. They'd bring a new 7-pound bag of bird seed almost every visit, with no regard for how much was already in his closet. At first, the maintenance guys took on the bird feeder responsibility, but after a few months they decided they didn't have time and wouldn't be doing it anymore. One of the nurse's aides that worked with Meemaw, Nellie, decided she'd take up the cause, so any time Thomas's bird feeders got low, she'd bring his bag of birdseed out and refill them. Thomas would get a little down when he couldn't watch his birds at the feeders, so when Nellie took on the responsibility, everyone was glad to see him perk back up. Nellie took this seriously, and never let those bird feeders run out. Meemaw said she was a very sweet young woman and seemed to love nothing more than doing that little something extra to make the residents happy. She was reliable, always a few minutes early to her shift, and always happy to help her residents and her co-workers. And as my Meemaw always pointed out at this part of the story, the good die young. Nellie was only 23 when a drunk driver hit her head-on as she was on her way home, having stopped off at the grocery store after her shift. It was bad enough to be a closed-casket funeral, but according to Meemaw, Nellie wasn't really gone. After a week or so, one of the nurses pointed out that they should probably refill the bird feeders because they'd have to be empty by now. They sent Nellie's replacement, Joanne, to get it taken care of. Joanne looked out Thomas's window and returned to let them know that they were already full. And every time they checked, that was the case. No one took ownership of having filled them. They even asked the night shift folks, the administration, and the maintenance team that had refused to continue taking care of it to begin with. Eventually, they all started to joke that it must be Nellie's spirit taking care of Thomas's bird feeders. About 8 months after Nellie's death, Thomas died from a severe case of being 99 years old. His kids decided they'd donate the bird feeders and leave them where they were, and they left the birdseed in his closet. The feeders kept on getting filled, and still no one would take the credit for it. It wasn't long before a new resident moved into Thomas's room, and she enjoyed the bird feeders outside the window as well. But without Thomas's kids constantly restocking the seed, the supply in the closet eventually ran out. That's when the closet door started misbehaving. The new resident would often complain that her closet door must be broken, because it would open and close on its own, sometimes really hard. The staff had no trouble believing it because it was a loud slamming. Then a couple of housekeepers complained that any time they hung the new resident's laundry in the closet, the door would slam shut again before they could close it themselves. One said that she was just mopping on the other side of the room when the door threw itself open and then shut. Before long, almost everyone working there had witnessed this closet door banging open or shut with no one's assistance. They all seemed to find it interesting and novel at first, but before long everyone was pretty annoyed with it. Meemaw said a few of them went into the room and asked Nellie or Thomas to please stop, and the reply was always the door slamming itself open or closed, sometimes in rapid succession. They even called a preacher over at one point to pray, but even he was met with only the slamming closet door for all his efforts. They moved the new resident out of the room because she wasn't able to rest for the door. Then one day, my Meemaw and one of her fellow nurses were chatting about that closet door over their lunch, and it occurred to them that the big change was the lack of birdseed in the closet to keep the feeders filled. After work that day, Mima stopped on her way home and bought a bag, and the next day she opened it up and put it in that closet. Sure enough, the closet didn't open or close on its own, and the bird feeders were refilled regularly. As an experiment, they let the new bag run out and didn't replace it at first. The closet door started back to misbehaving, and when they put a new bag of birdseed in, all was quiet. From then on, they all took turns making sure the supply never ran out, and they never had to hear the slamming closet door again. The bird feeders would be full, and no one knew how, but any resident who lived in that room after always had 2 full feeders and birds outside their window. "5. Hello all. I was hoping some people on here could help explain or provide insight on something I experienced just a few minutes or so ago. I have trouble sleeping sometimes, and when I do, I find it helps if I just go for a small walk. Usually I stick to about 15 minutes just to get blood flowing and to collect myself. Today I decided to go for a walk after not being able to sleep, and I decided to walk along an abandoned railroad track that's right behind my apartment complex. I've done this before, and usually I go there and end up seeing feral cats and the occasional raccoon, possum, etc. I usually only walk till I hit a few minutes, then turn around and come back. Today was much different. I began walking down the tracks in the same direction I always go, and get to the spot I normally turn around, then come back as I've done before. Upon walking back towards my apartment, I noticed I could hear what sounded like footsteps to my left, down in the brush below the man-made fill that is the railroad tracks. I paused to listen because a large amount of animals can be identified by the sound they make when they walk. I noticed, however, when I paused I could no longer hear the steps, as if whatever I was hearing also paused. So I then began to walk again, and almost immediately started to hear the steps, so I paused again. This time the steps continued, and sounded bipedal as if another person was walking through the brush down below. So I stood there and continued to listen to the steps, continued moving, and stopped what I'd estimate would be about 30 or so meters from me. I noticed when the steps stopped, however, that whatever the animal was, it had stopped completely downwind from me, which I thought was odd. I then heard it start to scale up towards my direction slowly at first and stop again. I kneeled down in the middle of the tracks to try and not silhouette myself and continued to observe. I then gave out a small alert whistle, big mistake, which then prompted the animal to pick up its pace. I grabbed some big pieces of gravel as I was unsure of what was quickly approaching me and placed them in my hoodie's pocket. I then pulled out my phone flashlight and held it out in front of me. To my absolute horror, only a few short seconds later, I heard the creature crash through the last of the brush. I could then see it with my own eyes, assisted by the flashlight. It was humanoid, with normal person proportions, but his eyes had a slight reflection to them, in a bluish color similar to that of a deer. However, its skin looked like tree bark. I saw no hair on its head, and where it was standing I could tell it wasn't a camouflaged person. I locked eye contact with it for I'd say a solid 15 to 20 seconds, then it immediately stepped back into the brush and stayed there. I continued to stay in my exact spot for a few minutes, as I knew what I had just witnessed was likely waiting for me to move. After just a brief few minutes, it then began to walk down into the brush below again. I then ran the rest of the way back down the railroad tracks to my apartment, and immediately started this post so I could record my encounter as sharply as possible. Does anyone have any ideas on what this could have been, or experienced anything similar? I'm an army vet with a large amount of time in the woods, and grew up hunting and fishing, along with exploring a nearby state park my whole life, and have never experienced this kind of thing before. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Paranormal Stories, episode 367, and thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please hit the like button. It helps YouTube recommend the video to other people. And if you'd like to get early access to these videos, you can do that by clicking on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description below, as is the link to the Hellfreezer merchandise store on Teespring. And if you want to leave a tip, you can do that by clicking on the heart with the $sign underneath the video and select the tip of your choice. That is never required, but I appreciate it if you do and it helps me out. Okay, no other business today, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, and this question comes from Genwolf on the Discord, and they ask, if you could choose one food you've tried and hated to vanish, what would it be? That's an interesting one. A food that I've hated. Oh, actually, yes. I won't say the brand name, but it was a brand name. It was a vegan tuna, so artificial tuna. And not because it was fake tuna, that's fine, I'm okay with that. Keep trying till you get it right. But it was so awful. It tasted like really bad licorice. But it had the texture of tuna, which is, just such an awful thing that should never be allowed to exist. So that's the one thing I would want to get rid of forever. Why don't you leave your answers in a comment below. And before we go, we'll have the answer of the day from a previous video. And this comes from Paranormal Stories 365. And this was in relation to what is the creepiest and oddest thing you've seen while staying anywhere other than home. And today's answer comes from Johnny Harper's Scout Stable, I think that's right. And their answer is, never been freaked out at hotels, but the one I work at has a room that no one likes to go to for maintenance. They say a man killed his family in that room, and now strange things happen in there. 4 housekeeping girls have quit. They said they would hear voices in the bathroom, and the door would lock them inside. Thank you very much for your answer, Johnny Harper. Okay, and with that, I can hear the birds chirping outside. It's almost 7 a.m. and I've got 2 more videos to make, so I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.